It's called human is not really what we think it should be.
It should be a being. The very nature of being. You're a philosopher.
Yes. Well, I'm trying to think about life.
Yeah.
But it's a bit facetious, but it still struck me.
You're right. I take the point. Thank you. Hi, good evening, everybody. Shall we start? Thanks for coming out in the cold. Thank you. Well, thank you. I gave one lecture today at lunchtime. So, oh yes, you were there. Yes, thank you. Just two things. The bibliography, the reference list. I'll try and do one this weekend, and probably leave it at reception, and they could make photocopies, and you could go and fetch them, so you could have a reference list. I was stopped by the booksellers today to say people are looking for Ellis's book and for Damasio's book, and
I found it on the route. It's coming.
in soft cover.
Yeah, it's coming.
Which one? Ellis's book?
Ellis and Sons.
Yeah. Okay. Oh.
Against to Chikonya.
So she wants me there.
As close as you want.
You want me there. You want me. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. The other thing is, I have a break next week, and then I'm going to do a series on great moments in medicine. If any of you are interested. Now, the choice of topics was mine, so you could say I'm biased. But have a look at the brochure. It'll be nice to see some familiar faces there again. Okay, thank you. I'm not selling for summer school. I'm just saying that I'm going to miss you so much. So the thought that you'll be there is a good one. Okay. Now, I was not going to actually talk much today. I thought I'll have a break. But I got up this morning and I said, I do owe you something, and that is to just give you a wider view. And this is what I've done with my students over the years. When students come to medical school and study subjects like physiology, which is the function of various parts of the body, or if they study medical biochemistry, looking at what goes on inside a cell, I always feel it's unfair for us to just get into it and just teach them about the cell or teach them about bodily function. I always felt that you need to start from somewhere really big and home in on the topic. So you give them a context. And I feel that I haven't given you enough of a context. So can I do that now? Okay. So there's two things for me that were particularly important, and I think partly it's been a disappointment in my life that when the teacher mentioned it to me, when he dictated it and we took it down as notes, I didn't see the power behind the statement. Now, Richard Feynman was considered to be a 20th century genius in physics, okay? And he was very involved in the creation of the atom bomb. So he worked at Caltech, and he was asked, Mr. Feynman, if the world was going to end in the next 5 minutes, what would you say was humankind's greatest achievement? And he says, the discovery that all matter is made of atoms. Is made of atoms. Okay? All matter is made of atoms. So he said that in this one sentence you will see there is an enormous amount of information about the world if just a little imagination and thinking are applied. Okay? Now, that's just a model of an atom. So an atom has a nucleus with positively charged particles called protons inside the nucleus, and neutral particles called neutrons. And around the atom are these electrons, which are negatively charged. So the negative charges here balance with the positive charge, right? Now, in chemistry, you get exchanges of electrons with other atoms, and that's how you form bonds. But in physics, the physicists are more interested in this, the nucleus. Okay, now, so that was the first statement, that all matter is made of atoms. The second very important statement that I probably didn't see the significance of in high school was that the cell is the basic unit of living matter. Okay, that's particularly important. I only saw the value of those two statements later, and from this arose all of biology. Okay, so you know that a sperm is a cell and the ovum is a cell, and then you get a fertilized ovum and you get cell division, and eventually this becomes a whole living organism. Now, we've been told by Damasio, and we've been going through this in the week, that homeostasis, but no mind, no feelings or awareness of subjectivity, that's what happens in unicellular organisms, the first inhabitants of this planet. Precursors of feeling and subjectivity that help regulate the organism's existence through chemistry, in turn a precursor to our endocrine and immune systems. So essentially in one cell you get chemical reactions and you get a certain trace of awareness, but it's not the kind of awareness that you have as a complex multicellular being. Social insects and animals show cultural behavior, cultural, he's got in inverted commas, through instincts, programs assembled over eons by natural selection and transmitted by genes. Like a spider making its web. We can't make a web, a spider can, but a spider doesn't think through the process, it makes the web by instinct. Okay, so the biological roots of cultures, from unicellular organisms with no intellects or feelings, displayed homeostasis from which emerged. So we emerged with behavioral strategies capable of maintenance and the flourishing of life, from single cells to animals including us. Unicellular organisms had mere chemical reactions. We have two, but we have systems, like the immune system, endocrine system, the nervous system, in which minds become possible with the associated images. Do you see that? So there is a continuity, but there's an increasing complexity as you get closer to us. So how does one connect the state of homeostasis to the making of a cultural instrument capable of correcting a homeostatic deficit? Okay. Feelings are the mental counterparts of homeostasis. Therefore, they operate as motives for engaging the creative intellect. Feelings are the link in the chain responsible for actual construction of the cultural practice. That's how important feelings are in our lives, in creating our cultures. So, we humans, human beings, the governing imperative is the same. It's homeostasis. Feelings become motives for new forms of response engendered by the uniquely rich creative intellect and motor ability of humans. Another important feature of the relation between feeling and culture, feelings could act as arbiters in the process. So, this chain of life, starting here, look at this long and winding road of 4 billion years until here today. You are the living ancestor of an unbroken chain of lives stretching from you through your mother and your grandmother, all the way back through the complete history of life on planet Earth to the very first life forms that appeared 4 billion years ago. Every single individual creature in that chain successfully survived for long enough to rear their young over and over again until it ended up with you. So you have shared a common ancestry. If you took a walk back in time over 4 billion years, you will find that you have shared a common ancestry with every living animal on this planet. Okay. Now, what do you see? What do I see from here? I see order. I see all of you sitting there in an ordered fashion. Would you agree? You ordered, the chairs are ordered. The way this hall is constructed, which is a product of the human mind, it's ordered. You don't get a light suddenly sitting on the screen, or you don't get your benches coming here and floating about here. Do you get that? No. It's a form of order. But we mustn't be fooled by that, because there are more states of disorder than order in the universe. Okay? Now, Stephen Hawking put this very nicely in his brief history of time. You know what he said? He said there's only one way to put a jigsaw puzzle together, but there are an infinite number of ways of having it in a disordered fashion. There are more disordered states in the universe than they are ordered. Okay? Now, one of the concepts we have to understand is that we all, everything, whether you're alive or whether you're inanimate, we are all manifestations of this thing called energy. Would you appreciate that? Because if you ask, but I'll tell you now. So energy is the principle pervading all nature. So from the very time of the Big Bang, or even before that, the Big Bang, let's say the Big Bang, and since then, everything that happened in this universe is a manifestation of this thing called energy. It's the principle that pervades all nature. It is very hard to give a concrete definition of energy. In school they told us energy is the ability to do work. But my friend Lutz Thilo, who used to teach with me in medicine, he used to ask the class, what is not energy? And there's no answer to that, because everything is a manifestation of energy. Now, this greatest of all exact generalizations was the conception of energy. It may, I believe, be demonstrated that work is lost to man irrecoverably when conduction occurs, but not lost in the material world. So what it's actually saying is that the energy of this entire universe is constant. I'm going to explain this to you in simple terms. The first law of thermodynamics, the first and second laws are my favorite laws. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It changes from one form to another. Okay? In such a process, some energy is always lost as heat. Now let me explain this to you. I've got here, for example, me. Okay? You've got to know me this week. I'm the lecturer here. I'm doing a course, right? And you know my name, and you know a bit of my background as to what I did at the university, etc., etc. Now, if I was suddenly blown apart, now I'm made of atoms, okay? I'm made of cells, and those cells are made of atoms. If I'm blown apart to the point that every one of my atoms is loosened, right? Every one of my atoms is loosened, and they just fly off, okay? You will say, oh, shame, Dr. Marley is gone, or Professor Marley is gone. He's not here anymore. There are people who are very close to me, like my family. They will mourn me, they will cry for me, they will mourn my absence. Would you agree? But when the universe does its books, its audit, it'll say, what are they crying about losing something? What are they crying about Anwar Mal being destroyed? He was a manifestation of energy. You can't destroy energy. The universe's energy is constant. All the atoms that made him are dispersed into the universe. It hasn't increased or decreased the universe's amount of energy. Does that make sense to you? Okay, so the energy content of our universe is constant, but energy has a qualitative phase that affects its efficacy. Okay, so here is the reaction that I want to tell you about. Okay, in this universe, the way it has become designed, okay, we live on a planet. We live on this pale blue dot in a far-flung corner of a galaxy called the Milky Way, which is a far-flung galaxy in this universe of billions of galaxies. And for some reason or the other, life began here. There could be life on other planets, in other galaxies, but we don't know for sure. But we did sure that this pale blue dot, this little ship that just moves around our sun in our solar system, has life. Okay. Now, so the sun is our ultimate source of energy. The sun is made up of hydrogen atoms. Those atoms have their nuclei fusing. All right? Now, imagine a hydrogen has a value of 1. And 2 hydrogens fuse to form helium, right? Which has an atomic number of 2, right? So what would 1 plus 1 be if 2 hydrogens fuse? 1 plus 1? 2. But helium is not 2, it's 1.999 something. What happened to that other little bit of matter? It got converted into energy, and that's the energy or the light or the electromagnetic radiation that we get from the sun every time hydrogens fuse to form helium. Right? Now, that's what we depend on for energy. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, that light, in this universe of wild moving atoms, takes 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, combines it with 6 molecules of water, and catalyzes, this is a catalyst now, to form what? Glucose. And the byproduct of that reaction is oxygen. Okay, and that's glucose that we eat. It happens in plants in the presence of this pigment, green pigment, called chlorophyll. And the process is called photosynthesis. And you've heard of it before in high school, right? If you haven't done science. So this light has been a major catalyst of this very important reaction. Now, you eat glucose. Perhaps you're not eating leaves, but there are complex carbohydrates in the foods you eat. You agree with me? And when you eat that, it goes into your gut, and those complex carbohydrates are broken down into its individual glucose molecules. Do you agree with me? And then that glucose is absorbed into your bloodstream, right? And it starts building up in your bloodstream, and you mustn't have too much of it, because then you could be diabetic. Do you agree with me? But that glucose is what? It's the energy that the sunlight has put together from these 2 substances. Would you agree? So in your blood now, you have a supply of energy in the form of glucose. Are you with me? Now, you can't let it circulate in the bloodstream. You want it to go into your tissue, because that's where it's required. Your tissue need energy. And I'm telling you, here is the energy. But the problem with this energy is that it's like me giving you $10 and say, please go to Pick n Pay and buy me a can of Coca-Cola. You take the $10 to Pick n Pay, that $10 is probably worth well over 100 rands, but you can't buy a can of Coke, because the clerk, they will tell you, sorry, but this is the wrong currency. Okay? You need to convert it into the proper currency, and that's rands. That's what we use here. So the rands of your cells are ATP. So this glucose has to be broken down to make ATP. And the cell has these beautiful pathways called glycolytic pathways that will break down the glucose into ATP, which is the currency you could use, and this is what you're using right now. Your brain cells are using it because you're listening intently to me. Okay. But how do you break it down? In biological terms, we say we oxidize the glucose in the presence of oxygen. So here's a reaction that gave you oxygen in the atmosphere. And we breathe in that oxygen. We breathe in that oxygen, and then it goes to all parts of our body, okay? And it oxidizes the glucose that's stored in the tissues and goes that way to produce water and carbon dioxide. So it goes in reverse. This is an extremely important reaction. Okay, are you with me? So, you know now so ultimately sunlight has put you together, and it's sunlight that's keeping you alive. It's sunlight that makes these things, and it's sunlight that helps you break them when you go in the reverse direction. And that reaction in your cells, where oxygen is used to break down this potential energy into what you require as ATP, happens in that thing called the mitochondria in your cell. And that mitochondria, let me remind you, was just a bacterium that entered your cells 2 billion years ago and said to the cell, I'd like to live inside you. And the cell said, no. And the bacteria said, I'll be better than ESCOM. I'll provide you, I'll be your powerhouse for energy. So the mitochondrion stayed, and this is where that process of making that ATP, which you use every second of your life to keep you alive. Okay, so let's look at the flow of energy through the universe. From the sun, okay, going to the tree, right, making a tree, and when energy is converted from one form to another. This is now a manifestation of energy. When energy is converted from one form to another, you get some energy always lost as heat. Okay. What does this heat do? It goes into the universe and increases its disorder. What did I tell you? There's more disorder in the universe than order. So to keep something ordered, you're increasing the disorder of the universe. The universe doesn't like us. There was a scientist in America by the name of Lewis Thomas. He wrote some beautiful books. He said if the universe was a rabbit, then we are the fleas on that rabbit, irritating it, extracting substances from it to keep alive and to keep ordered while we increase its disorder.
What was the name of that scientist that you just mentioned?
Lewis Thomas. Late Night Thoughts. That's his book. Okay, so in here you make glucose, which is an organic compound, and you give off oxygen, which you can breathe, okay? And then we eat the compounds and we grow. We are the chemotrophs. We've got all the chemical reactions, okay? And then eventually, when we convert those compounds back into, we break them down and make ATP, we give off carbon dioxide and water, and that's again reused to make this. And that's the flow of energy through this universe. Look how dependent we are on our forests. This has so much implication for us to look after this planet. There's these chemical reactions. Okay, so this is the energy flow through the biosphere. It begins as sunlight trapped by plants in photosynthesis, and then I just showed you this, that living organisms live off it, and then when they die, they rot, and they are broken down, and the energy and nutrients are passed on to other things. It gets into the soil, and then it gets recycled into nutrients, and the energy flow of life is made possible please note that the heat released at every stage increases the disorder of the universe. So, if you had come here by car, you filled your tank, you're very happy, I can get to UCT to listen to this talk, and you come here and you say, well, lovely, I had a full tank of petrol, and I've used some. I have converted some of that petrol into, which had potential energy, into kinetic energy because my car moved. Okay? But when you came here and you said, oh, well, I had that petrol to be able to come here, to be able to enable the car to move, if you put your hand on the bonnet of that car, it's hot. You've lost some energy as heat. You converted the petrol into kinetic energy for movement, and you've lost some of that as heat. But in the context of the entire universe, no energy was created or destroyed. It only changed from one form to the other. Okay, so now in science, these big ideas, as you narrow in onto ourselves and onto living organisms, these ideas come together, they converge. So the first great coming together was this idea of conservation of energy. It gave rise to so many other sciences, right? And the second great idea was Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection, and that gave rise to so many other disciplines, okay? And then in the 20th century, there was the great synthesis between Darwin's theory of evolution. Remember, Darwin didn't know what the unit of heredity was, and then modern genetics found that out. So biology became unified with physics and chemistry, and that's what Edward Wilson called it, consilience, which was the title of his book. Unlocking the secret of the gene was the birth of molecular biology. Now, the second law of thermodynamics is just what I've told you, that there are more disordered states than ordered ones. There is only one way to arrange the pieces of a jigsaw to make a picture. There are innumerable disordered arrangements one can make. Okay, so in the second law, you cannot convert energy from one form to another. You cannot convert glucose to ATP without losing part of that energy in the form of heat, and that heat increases the entropy or the disorder of the universe, always. So we are living at the expense of the universe. So when I came here and I saw everything was a mess and all these chairs and everything lying around, I had eaten, so I could convert glucose to ATP, and then I could use that ATP to order this room. But I lost, some of the energy was lost as heat, but the room became ordered. So this order that you're sitting in was at the expense of the disorder of the universe. Have I made that clear? Isn't it fascinating? Okay, so this entropy, I don't want to go too much into it, but what it says, the principle behind it is, if you had some kind of glass container and into it you injected some molecules, they will tend towards disorder. They won't stay here, right? And it's very unlikely that at any time, once they've spread out in that container, it's very unlikely that at any time they will come back and be at the position where they were injected, just here. Won't happen unless you put in energy to force them back there. Okay? So, it is a wonderful feeling to recognize the unity of a complex of phenomena that to direct observation appear to be quite separate things. What is happening in science now is that these big ideas are converging into smaller ideas. This is Lisa Randall. She's the professor of theoretical physics at Harvard, and she wrote this book, Dark Matter and the Dinosaurs. And she says that there is an astounding interconnectedness of the universe. Okay. Now, this convergence really began in the 1850s. And Peter Watson, in this book, Convergence, it was in this decade that interconnections and overlaps between various disciplines first started to show themselves in two fundamental areas, adding a whole new dimension to science. The 1850s were the momentous decade in the annals of science, with the greatest intellectual breakthroughs of all time, the realization of the way one science supports another, the beginning of a form of understanding like no other. This was in every way a new era intellectually. Where does interconnectedness lead to? To a unified, ordered, historical account of the universe we inhabit and our own place within that totality. And the narrative of the universe that has emerged is all the more impressive because, to begin with at least, no one went looking for it. It helped us create a world view. Okay, so there were great convergences like John Herschel. He thought that gravitation was the single principle which pervades all nature and connects together the most distant regions of space, as well as the most remote periods of duration. But Watson, the author of this book, believes that the conservation of energy and the theory of evolution by natural selection were the fruit of the coming together of several sciences in the 1850s and were the most exciting intellectual breakthroughs of all time. The way one science supports and interconnects with another is the beginning of a form of understanding like no other in history, okay? And so I told you about Edward Wilson consilience. And leading up to the 1850s was the Ionian enchantment in ancient Greece, Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, astronomy, the creation of the Royal Society in London, but the true convergence was in the 1850s. So, to be alive today, we are awash, says Damasio, in spectacular scientific discoveries. Would you agree with that? There's a technical brilliance that makes life convenient, long, comfortable, and disease-free. There's no doubt about that, okay? Human interconnectedness. Now we're talking at the human level. There's an interconnectedness is at its peak with travel and the internet. Agreed? International agreement and cooperation in science, art, trade, and sport. Okay? So we're really moving to getting together. But he is worried. Sorry? That's Antonio Damasio, whom I've been talking about all week, who wrote The Strange Order of Things. I'm getting that from his book now, okay? And it's the same man here. He's smiling there, but he's worried here. Why is he worried? But while scientific and technical literacy is at its peak, we spend little time reading and reflecting upon life. Still, the surest and most rewarding way to enter the comedy and drama of existence. There is an anti-intellectualism pervading this world. Look at the leader of the free world, the leader of the world's only superpower, and you'll know what he's talking about. Science in the use of politics and ideology. No good, no good, no good. Okay, we make no time to spend on the non-practical matter of just being. We are spiritually bankrupt, morally bankrupt. If all the political crisis in the world is anything to go by, whether it's the Zuma era in South Africa or the Trump era in the USA or Brexit or whatever, profit and sensation before truth. Profit before anything. Trump wants profit. He wants to burn more coal. He cares two hoots about global warming. He's not bothered. It's profit. Lots of information about no facts. We cannot make informed decisions easily, and then there are sudden crises we are met with, like sort of economic meltdowns that we've had so many of. Our societies are fragmented. Class, caste, color, race, massive inequalities of wealth, wonderful constitutions, but the reality is different. Look at the South African Constitution. Wonderful on paper, but in reality, we are divided and fragmented society. Now, this is what's amazing, that we've had so many achievements, and I'm just taking now the 19th and 20th century. We've had 400 years of science with Copernicus, 1652, is it? Galileo, Isaac Newton, 1642, Copernicus now in the 15th century. Then in the 1850s, we just spoke about energy and the new synthesis. We had Darwin in 1859, we had Mendel in 1865. In the 1890s, Freud introduced us to the theory of the mind. We've had so many medical achievements. In the 20th century, it began with Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity and the photoelectric effect. Then the general theory of relativity. Then the quantum revolution and amazing technology that went with it, from the transistor to the internet. Then there was the great synthesis of Darwin's theory in modern genetics, with Oswald Avery doing the crucial experiments in 1944 to show that the gene is a unit of heredity. And then in 1953, you had Watson and Crick, who worked out the structure of DNA. And then Sidney Brenner of South Africa worked out this idea of RNA and protein synthesis, and finally the human genome was mapped in 2001. Then in this 21st century, we're having this neuroscience revolution. We've been talking about it all week. Next week, I'll be talking about epigenetics, another big thing for the 21st century. Gene editing. There's a man who claimed that there's 2 new babies born in Korea. He edited the genes after fertilization. Then there's the question of artificial intelligence and what it means to be human. We're going to have personalized medicine soon. We're going to have designer babies. Who knows which way we're going, Billy? We don't know. Okay. And through it all, look at the world. Look at these achievements. Look at the inventions. And look at the maldistribution of it. There was a time not long ago in the 20th century when there were more telephones in Cape Town than in the whole of Africa. A maldistribution. Baroness Greenfield says, I am worried about the 21st century brain. Our children don't read. They're onto the internet these days. They're onto the cell phone. And those kind of things. The human condition today, we have massive amounts of information, but no way to analyze lots of it to our benefit. Now, all this while you are having this fantastic achievements, what happened to humanity? Every human being, which is a masterpiece of design, with its homeostatic regulation, with feelings, with emotions, with consciousness. We have all that we've been speaking about during the week. We had colonialism, slavery, 2 major world wars, the Bolshevik Revolution. Stalin murdered and slaughtered so many people. The rise of fascism, the Holocaust, apartheid and racial discrimination, the Arab-Israel conflict, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where so many millions died. Pol Pot, this guy was completely nuts. He murdered so many people. And then when decolonization occurred in Africa, we had dictatorships. Bosnia, Herzegovina, the Rwandan genocide. And in the 21st century, we had the Iraq invasion, based on a lie that they were weapons of mass destruction. The whole country was razed to the ground. That gave rise to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Libya, Rohingya, the massacre of a whole lot of people there by the military junta in Burma, all kinds of fundamentalisms, the post-Mandela period after a brief period of celebration and a rainbow nation, it's all gone. Neoliberalism, populism, and identity politics rule the world today. So Damasio says we've created a culture that would not have been possible without affect and consciousness. Then when we had Darwin's theory, we said, oh, humanity said, wow. And then what did we go and do? We had social Darwinism. Social Darwinism that led to eugenics and recommendation that we should aim for radical socio-cultural transformation, that people who are considered to be feeble should be killed. I'm reading this wonderful book by Carl Zimmer. Well, it's wonderful, but it's heartbreaking. By Carl Zimmer, called She Has Her Mother's Laugh. He discusses these things there. That Darwin's grandfather was part of this group that gave birth to modern eugenics. And eugenic recommendations led to genocides and exterminations of groups and people. So The core characteristics of human are the same, with roots in a common ancestor. After World War II, we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's a Spanish sociologist by Manuel Castells who says that the digital media have actually opened the way for a deep and healthy remodeling of governance. He's one of the optimistic ones, and I hope he's right. A rearrangement of human powers which is compatible with democracy is still possible, he says. And the internet has a huge role to play. So I'm waiting for that. I've been writing to the newspapers. I said, instead of talking about us as Indians, Africans, we're all Africans, so Indians, blacks, coloreds, and whites, why don't we teach Darwin's theory in the schools? Why don't we teach the children about the migration I told you about the other day and the fact that we are descendants of the whole of humanity? Why didn't we teach them that? So one of the greatest ideas that resulted in showing how our biology shaped cultural events by Darwin, James, Freud, Emil Durkheim, amongst others, and theorists like this, led to social Darwinism. So where are we? We had eugenics in Europe and USA in the Third Reich, and towards the end of the 20th century, sociobiologists and evolutionary psychologists made a case for a biological perspective on the cultural mind and for the biological transmission of culture-related traits. And it's this man, Edward Wilson, who wrote the book Consilience. He said, essentially we are biological beings. We must understand our natures thoroughly so the contribution we make to cultures will be a compassionate one. When we can overcome our greed, where we can overcome our racism, our feelings of discrimination. We've got to understand it from a biological point of view. And here Damasio incorporates consciousness, emotion and feeling, all directly related to homeostasis. Okay? So, conflicts within groups are integral components of cultures. Diversity seems to contain the germ of conflict. Okay? Jonathan Haidt, he was an American social psychologist, says he's a professor of ethical leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. His main areas of study are the psychology of morality and the moral emotions. And Haidt says education is the answer. I ask, is it? He was educated, he went to university, he went to university, he went to university. What did they do? What do? They didn't do much for humanity. So, Steven Pinker in How the Mind Works says we are a parliament of good and bad feelings and emotions. And we must understand how the mind works. That's what this book is called. And we need to balance these emotions. We need to use our conscious agency to say, I'm thinking badly. I'm thinking badly of the other. That's the root of the conflict in the world. Okay? After the Holocaust, we said never again, and then we had all this Adolf Hitler, and this is what I wrote about once in the Cape Times. And have we learned from it? There was a pertinent dialogue in William Styron's Sophie's Choice. Have you read it? Which goes as such: where was God at Auschwitz? The answer is, where was man? And I said, there's a lesson in there for all of us. Okay? So, that's Darwin's hunch. So, Antonio Damasio asks, how does one connect the state of homeostasis to the making of a cultural instrument capable of correcting deficits in our society? Does feeling, the mental expression of the homeostatic state, which when they go wrong, create upheavals in our lives, or when they're right, operate as motives for engaging the creative intellect, socially and academically? So he's putting the focus on our feelings. And yesterday we discussed how these feelings are physiological functions in the body which create and contribute to homeostasis. Okay? We've had religions. Some of them have failed us. Some of them, there's a view that if there were no religions at all, the slaughter amongst us would have been greater. I'm prepared to accept that. There's Sam Harris, who wrote The Moral Landscape, who says we should make science an objective reality. And through science, we must improve ourselves. Ursula Goodenough says we need a common narrative in this book. She says, look, you look at a beautiful sunset and you say, oh, how wonderful. It gives you a pleasant feeling. Your feelings are upgraded to positive feelings. But she says, why don't we try and learn something about the sun to appreciate the sunset? Would that demystify the beauty of the sunset if we learn science as to how sunlight works, and if we learn science as to how our brain is receiving that beautiful view and converting it into beautiful feelings within us? She feels she feels that the scientific imperative is a very important imperative. Now, she says there are two things. If we look at the world, we are divided into categories. I'm Muslim, you Hindu or Christian or Jewish, right? Or at another level, I'm professional, I'm a medical person, you're an engineer, so we have all those categories. And that's fine. We're common humanity. What we need, she said, is a common narrative. And that common narrative is, one, this universe started as a big bang and it expanded and it produced us. So we've grown out of this universe. And the second narrative is that in our mother's wombs we started as one cell, all of us, fertilized ovum, and we grew into a human being. So those are the common narratives which are broad and unite all of us, including your cats, your dogs, your trees. So it even gives you a motive to look after your environment, not to be cruel to animals, not to go and destroy vegetation. Your life, your current life, and your future depend on these things. Okay, so there's a lot that science can teach you. Okay, so the point of it all is all mental faculties intervene in the human cultural process. Cultural minds cannot function without emotions, feelings, and consciousness, and the images associated with these processes. And neither does the creative intelligence for the actual practices and artifacts of cultures. Now, I've actually used this in my teaching. And I feel that you cannot go into a class and teach civil engineering or biology or math without transmitting to these young people our common humanity. And there's many ways of bringing that in. You don't need to change the syllabus. When people talk about transformation of the mind, transformation of the curricula, I've been teaching young people biochemistry. And when I teach them biochemistry, I say, look, this is the pathway. This is how glucose is broken down to energy. When you're starving, these pathways make adaptations to accommodate that starvation to a point. But if food doesn't come at all, then you get the starvation which you had in Ethiopia, in parts of South Africa, in which babies and people are so starved that if you try to feed them, you could kill them, right? And you can discuss the biochemical processes that are involved in those conditions, but at the same time, you can talk about why do people have to starve in a world of plenty? Where have we human beings fallen short of actually providing food and sustenance for everybody because there's so much in this world? Why are some people so greedy that they have to have so much money, which they don't need? And just down the road, a few minutes out of Cape Town, you see starvation. Why is it such? So that's education. It's a totality. We need specialists, but we also need generalists. We need people to be able. Today's graduate is required, and I used to say this at the graduation ceremonies, today's graduate is required not only to be a doctor, to see to people's illnesses in the community, but to be completely wider, to ask questions about inequality. poverty, disease, lack of clean water. So the graduates we create today should be people who are in vital contact mentally with a lot that's going around them besides their specialities. So, in 2000, and I'm not showing off, I just want to tell you, I was awarded the Distinguished Teacher Award by the university. It's a once-in-a-lifetime award that the university bestows on its good teachers. And so I was given that. The reason I'm telling you this is the students responded to my teaching. They actually enjoyed it, and they felt that it wasn't only going to contribute to making them doctors, it was contributing to making them well-rounded human beings. That's what we need to produce in our schools and our institutions. Danke. Now you can share your thoughts with me and tell me how you think you can make the world a better place, starting with knowing that that the forces that operated in this universe made you beautiful people, homeostatically regulated, who have a passion for knowledge, who have come here to listen and to discuss with me. Now tell me, why is it that you're so beautifully designed, you have this homeostasis which has used your feelings and the creative intellect to produce our society, and yet that society is broken? What's the solution? Yes.
I think everything is a question of interpretation, isn't it?
Okay.
When you tell us how bad things are,
Yeah.
you can also say, compared with 400 or 500 years ago, how we have improved in many, many fields. You get the example of medicine. People used to be 30 years old, now 80 or 90. You're killing less people now than we used to, and so on and so on. So it has also two sides.
Sure. No, I agree with that. But there's room for improvement.
Of course.
Yeah. As Dostoevsky said, that even the murder of one child is too much. Yeah.
I want to know what happens to all that heat that causes a disorder. Aren't we going to burn ourselves out eventually?
Well, eventually the universe is going to die because it will reach a state of maximum disorder.
Yeah. So that is happening.
That is happening. Yeah. I mean, your mortality at an individual level is inevitable. So is the demise of this universe. But there is this thing that it's going to happen between 5 and 15 billion years' time, that our sun will. But there's this story about a man who went to listen to a scientist speaking, and he fell asleep in the talk, and the scientist said, the sun should burn out in about 15 billion years. And suddenly he woke up, this man who was asleep. And he says, what did you say? See, the scientist said, I said the sun could burn out in about 15 billion years. He said, oh, I got worried for a while. I thought you said the sun was going to burn out in 5 billion years. But what did it matter to him? Yes, sir. Thank you.
There was just one that I really worried about. If you look down in a microscope and you see a cell, a unicellular organism like amoeba, how can you tell whether it is aware that it is alive and whether there is a goal in the life of an amoeba?
Yeah.
How can you explain that one amoeba would connect sexually with another amoeba without feeling, without passion?
Those are excellent questions. So I would say that the amoeba has no nervous system. Okay. No. But if you consider that the underlying principle of Darwinism is survival and reproduction, right? Then the amoeba, in a sort of funny sort of way, is obeying those principles.